My name is Michael Thomsen. I grew up in Denmark, but I lived all my adult life in Australia. I currently live in Tasmania, the island south of the mainland Australia, and it's a very beautiful place. I've been a herbalist and naturopath for nearly 40 years. I also have a PhD in medical sciences from the University of Sydney. And my biggest claim to fame is the Phytotherapy Desk Reference, which is both a book for students and practitioners of herbal medicine, and also an online application with herb-drug interactions and research, as well as traditional information about herbal medicine. So that's the main focus of my work now, is to update the book and the application.
Hi there, Michael again. So now we're gonna talk more about hops. So hops has been staples in brewings for centuries. So can you tell me a bit more about how hops were traditionally used in brewings and also how their roles has evolved over time? So I love to hear about their origins and how different cultures have used them.
Sure. I don't know too much about the different cultures, but it's been used for centuries in Europe and across Asia, for sure, as a traditional medicine. I believe the Romans used it specifically for anxiety, insomnia, and digestive disorders. And that's actually the use today. So that hasn't really changed that much. Apparently, it was first documented in beer brewing in the 9th century in monasteries in Europe. And there's a very famous herbalist called Hildegard of Bingen, who was a 12th century German abbess. And he discovered that it was a preservative when it was added to beer. So they started to add more hops to the beer in Europe. And this also spread to England. And if you're a beer drinker, you'll know that there's a style of beer called the Indian Pale Ale, IPA. It's a very sort of boutique beer as well, especially in Australia. And that contains a lot of hops, and it gives it that sort of that flavor that people like. It contributes a bitterness, a lot of flavor, and the aroma of those kinds of hoppy beers, if you like. So that's the background and moving into the sort of the commercial use in beer brewing. But alongside that, it was always a sedative, a relaxing herb, and something that might help with anxiety and also poor sleep.
Oh, okay. So as you mentioned, that it brings the bitterness and also the aromas to the beer during the process. Also, as you mentioned before in the veteran product, so it combined use with hops, those stress relief drugs. I have heard they have also some of the medical properties as well. So how are they being used in the other products?
Yeah, I think the combination is because we consider valerian to be more of a relaxing herb, relaxes the body, perhaps also the mind, but it doesn't actually induce sleep directly. And therefore, it's often combined with the hops, which is more relaxing. People who drink too much beer, they get a bit sleepy. It could be the alcohol, but could be the hops as well. So that combination has developed in Europe, especially in the German-speaking countries, as a really nice formulation for poor sleep in terms of falling asleep or frequent waking or just sort of general insomnia. But it's also supposed to help with anxiety, as I mentioned earlier. It's also, because it's bitter, it's a digestive aid. So all bitter herbs seem to prime digestion. That's why we use bitter herbs in aperitifs. So the liquors that you can take before a meal or after a meal to improve digestion of that meal. But the modern application still is as a mild sedative for insomnia and anxiety. That will still be the main and the modern indication for hops. But there is another thing about hops that's quite interesting, and it's related to some of the side effects of drinking too much beer as well. And that is that it contains phytoestrogens. Now, these are not the actual hormone estrogen. They're called phyto or plant estrogens, but they have a slight similar effect in that they can interact with the estrogen receptors. And you might have noticed that some beer drinkers can get a bit of a beer gut, but they can also start to grow breasts, male breasts as well.
Oh,
And that can happen from other alcohols as well. I think bourbon is another spirit that can cause that, and that could be too much of these phytoestrogens. But they are actually medicinal. They can help with some of the symptoms of menopause, hot flushes and so on, and sweating. So they're not necessarily bad, but you don't want them in excess. And so hops do contain the phytoestrogens. And so there will be some concern maybe if somebody had a breast cancer, especially active cancer, then maybe a lot of hops is not a great idea for them because of estrogen generally is a very stimulant herb for cancer. It doesn't cause cancer, but if you have a cancer that is what's called estrogen sensitive,
mhm.
then estrogen is a growth hormone and it can stimulate the cancer growth. I think that anybody with a hormone sensitive cancer breast cancer, perhaps even prostate cancer, should probably avoid hops for that reason. But most other people would be totally fine.
That's something new for me. So I heard people saying if you have like a breast cancer that you can't drink that much beer because of something, but I don't know the reason behind it.
That could be one, but of course, alcohol is actually a class one carcinogen. So
Yeah.
we should all avoid alcohol. Basically, there's no good reason for drinking alcohol other than it's a social lubricant. It can feel nice and it could be good for social interactions. But medically speaking, or for health, there's no good reason for having alcohol.
So now I have the other questions about hops. I read some paper saying like hops are actually related to cannabis plants. Does the connections between these two herbs have any impact and
Yeah,
how
that's
they're
a
being used?
Yeah, great question. I don't know, but they contain different compounds, so I don't think that they are the same kind of effects. But I really haven't really thought about that. The hop plants is very interesting. It grows on a vine. They grow a lot of hops in Tasmania. It's a very highly sought after quality of hops, and it grows in these sort of long vines. They have elaborate structures of poles and wires, and it grows up the wires 6 meters tall. And they get the little, it's called a strobile, a little flower, and it looks somewhat similar to the cannabis. I see what you mean about the flower head is a bit similar, but no, very different constituents, I think.
All right. Thank you so much for that.